I can't stop replaying it all in my head. Every conversation, every laugh, every text. The shame sits like a stone in my chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. 3 years of friendship gone in an instant because I convinced myself that her kindness meant something more. She blocked me everywhere last week, and I'm left wondering if I've been the villain in this story all along without even realizing it. It started innocently enough. We met through mutual friends at a local literary festival, bonding over our shared love of obscure Russian authors and dark coffee. She worked at the downtown library, always surrounded by books, always with a recommendation on the tip of her tongue. I was drawn to her immediately, not just because of her striking eyes or the way she gestured wildly when talking about her favorite novels, but because she seemed to see me, really see me, in a way few people ever had. When I was diagnosed as high-functioning autistic in my late 20s, many relationships in my life shifted. People either treated me with kid gloves or slowly drifted away, unsure how to navigate our new dynamic. But not her. She never made me feel like I was a puzzle to be solved or a burden to be managed. Our friendship felt effortless, a rare thing in my world of carefully calculated social interactions. For the first year, our relationship was purely platonic. We'd meet for coffee before her shift, discussing everything from philosophy to true crime podcasts. I valued her perspective, her intellect. She was married, happily, I thought, to a guy who worked in finance. Sometimes she'd mention him in passing. Little domestic anecdotes that I'd nod along to while secretly wondering what it would be like to be the one making her laugh at home. I didn't recognize my feelings as anything more than friendship until much later. Looking back, maybe I was already falling for her then, cataloging her preferences and habits with an attention to detail I rarely granted others. The way she always ordered an extra shot in her latte on Mondays. How she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when contemplating a particularly difficult question. The slight furrow between her brows when she was trying not to cry while discussing a book that had moved her. But then, life happened as it always does. We drifted apart, not dramatically, just the slow continental drift of adult friendships. Different schedules, different priorities. I dated other people. She got promoted. Our coffee meetups became monthly, then quarterly. I missed her, but in that vague way you miss someone who's still technically in your life. Then last year, I set myself a challenge. Read a book a day for a month. It was ambitious, maybe a little pretentious, but I needed something to pull me out of the rut I'd fallen into. I posted about it on social media, not expecting much engagement. But she reached out immediately, her enthusiasm bubbling through her text messages. "This is amazing. You have to let me help create your reading list." Just like that, she was back in my life, more present than ever before. We'd text daily about what I was reading, exchanging thoughts and theories. Sometimes our conversations would stretch late into the night, and I'd fall asleep with my phone in my hand, our message thread the last thing I saw before closing my eyes. What I didn't know then, what would change everything, was that while I was rebuilding my life page by page, hers was slowly coming apart at the seams. It started with subtle hints dropped into our conversations. Comments about feeling lonely, despite being married. Mentions of arguments that never seemed to resolve. At first, I did what friends do. I listened, I sympathized, I offered whatever wisdom my limited experience could provide. But I also felt something else stirring, something I wasn't proud of: hope. Every time she complained about her husband, a small, selfish part of me celebrated. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't deny the flutter in my chest when she'd text me instead of him during their fights, choosing me as her confidant, her shelter from the storm at home. Meanwhile, I was working on myself in ways I never had before. After years of awkward dates and short-lived relationships that fizzled out because I couldn't read the signals or respond appropriately, I decided to tackle my dating life with the same methodical approach I applied to everything else. I read books on body language, joined workshops on effective communication, practiced flirting with strangers at bars just to see what worked. And I was getting better, noticeably better. Women who would have ignored me a year ago were now laughing at my jokes, leaning in when I spoke, touching my arm as they said goodbye. My confidence grew with each successful interaction, and I began to see myself differently. Not as the awkward, perpetually misunderstood outsider, but as someone desirable, someone worth choosing. When I shared these successes with my librarian friend, something shifted between us. There was a new energy in our conversations, an undercurrent I couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. She began complimenting me more on my intelligence, my humor, my appearance. "You clean up nice," she'd text when I'd send a photo before a date with someone else. Or their loss, when I'd report back that a promising connection hadn't panned out. Looking back, I can see how dangerous this trajectory was, how primed I was to misinterpret friendly support as something more. But in the moment, all I felt was a growing certainty that what we had was special, that she was seeing me in a new light, just as I was seeing myself differently. The flirtation escalated gradually. A suggestive joke here, a lingering touch there. I'd send her messages that pushed the boundaries of friendship, testing the waters, seeing how far I could go. "You're making it hard for me to focus on other women," I'd write. Or, if things were different, letting the implication hang in the digital space between us. And she'd respond. That was the thing that confused me most, that gave oxygen to the fire of my hope. She'd respond with laughter, with flirtation of her own, with confessions about finding me attractive, about wondering what might have been in another life. On Valentine's Day, in a moment of reckless courage, or perhaps callous disregard for her marriage, I'm still not sure which, I texted her something I can't believe I had the audacity to send. "Think about me tonight instead of him." I expected shock, maybe anger. Instead, she replied OMG, followed by laughter emojis, and minutes later, a selfie that made my heart race. Was this emotional infidelity? Were we both crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed? I didn't let myself dwell on these questions. Instead, I focused on the rush I felt every time my phone lit up with her name, every time she chose to turn to me instead of her husband. She confided that she felt trapped in her marriage, that they hadn't been truly connected in years. She spoke of leaving, of starting fresh, of needing to rediscover who she was outside of being someone's wife. I listened. I encouraged. I fantasized about being the one she turned to when she was finally free. When she announced she was moving out to stay with her sister for a while, I felt like we were approaching some invisible finish line I'd been racing toward without acknowledging it. The barriers between us were crumbling. Soon, I thought, there would be nothing standing in our way. I was so wrong. Finding her profile on Tinder was like spotting a familiar face in a crowd, unexpected yet somehow inevitable. Her bio was simple, direct, recently separated, figuring things out. The photos showed a woman I recognized, but had never fully seen before. More carefree, more vibrant than she'd been in our recent conversations, like she'd already shed a skin I hadn't realized was weighing her down. I swiped right immediately, of course. How could I not? After months of building what I thought was a connection deeper than friendship, this seemed like the universe handing me the opportunity I'd been waiting for. When we matched, my heart nearly beat out of my chest. This was confirmation, validation of everything I'd been feeling. I didn't wait, didn't plan my approach. I messaged her immediately, going for playful, confident. "You didn't need to go through all this trouble if you wanted to hang out, you know." Looking back, I can see the presumption in my words, the entitlement. But in the moment, I felt clever, charming even. This was the new me, the me who didn't stumble over social cues, who knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to go after it. Her response came quickly. 4 words that stopped me cold. "Sure, but just as friends. After everything, after all the flirtation and late-night texts and Valentine's Day confessions, she saw me as just a friend. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I'd like to say I handled it gracefully, that I valued our friendship enough to accept what she was offering. But the truth is uglier than that. Pride and hurt and confusion all tangled together into a knot in my chest, and what came out was defensive, dismissive. Sorry, not what I'm looking for. Even as I typed the words, a part of me knew I was making a mistake. 3 years of connection, of understanding, of seeing and being seen. Was I really ready to throw all of that away because she didn't want me romantically? But another part, the wounded part, couldn't bear the thought of sitting across from her at a coffee shop, pretending I didn't want more, watching her eyes light up as she told me about some other man who'd managed to capture her interest where I had failed. So I did what felt like self-preservation at the time. I removed her from Snapchat, severing one of our main channels of communication. I kept her on Facebook, telling myself it was a compromise, a door left slightly ajar in case either of us changed our minds. The days that followed were a strange mix of grief and rationalization. I missed our conversations desperately, but convinced myself I'd done the right thing. I couldn't be the friend in the friend zone. God, I hate that term now. How entitled it sounds, how it reduces the gift of someone's friendship to a consolation prize. I had been clear about my intentions, hadn't I? She was the one who led me on, who encouraged my flirtation while knowing she didn't see me that way. Except, had she really? Or had I simply seen what I wanted to see, interpreted her friendliness, her vulnerability during a difficult time in her life, as something it wasn't? These questions kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying our interactions with new uncomfortable clarity. 3 weeks passed. I thought of her daily, but resisted the urge to reach out. I went on dates that felt hollow, had conversations that never seemed to reach the depth I'd grown accustomed to with her. I told myself I was moving on, that this was healthy, necessary. Then, I found the book. I was browsing in a small independent bookstore when I saw it. A limited edition collection of essays by her favorite author, the one she'd mentioned wanting to read for years, but could never find. It was expensive, probably more than I should have spent, but I bought it without hesitation. This wasn't about romance anymore, I reasoned. This was about honoring a friendship that had meant something to me, regardless of how it ended. I took a photo of the book and sent it to her on Facebook with a simple message. I know I said I wouldn't bother you anymore, but I thought you needed to see this. It made me think of you immediately. For a day, there was nothing. I checked my phone obsessively, wondering if she'd seen the message, what she might be thinking. Then, when I tried to look at her profile again, I discovered the truth. She had blocked me. Not just unfriended, blocked. A complete digital excision, as if I'd never existed in her online life at all. The finality of it stunned me. I'd thought we were at least beyond that kind of scorched earth ending. I'd thought, despite everything, that what we'd shared for 3 years had meant something to her too. That's when the shame hit me, unexpected, overwhelming. Not just disappointment or hurt, but deep, visceral shame that burned in my chest and crawled up my throat until I could taste it. I couldn't understand it at first. Why shame? I'd been rejected before. I ended friendships before. This painful aftermath wasn't completely unfamiliar territory. Yet something about this situation left me feeling fundamentally wrong, tainted in some way I couldn't articulate. Was I ashamed because I'd prioritized my romantic feelings over a friendship that had once been precious to me? Because I interpreted her vulnerability during the collapse of her marriage as an opening for my own desires? Because I'd sent that final message not purely out of generosity, but with some small hope that it might reopen the door between us? All of these, perhaps. But beneath them lay something even more uncomfortable. The possibility that I'd been the villain in this story all along. Had I, with my persistent flirtation, made her feel unsafe in our friendship? Had I added pressure to an already painful period in her life? Had she felt cornered, obligated to reciprocate my attention because I was one of her few supports during her marital crisis? The thought makes me sick. I've always prided myself on being respectful of boundaries, on being the good guy. My autism might make it harder for me to read social cues, but it's never been an excuse for making others uncomfortable. Yet here I was, blocked by someone I cared deeply about, left to wonder if I'd been harassing rather than charming, threatening rather than supportive. It's been 2 months now since that final rejection, and the shame hasn't fully subsided. Some days it's just a quiet hum in the background of my thoughts. Other days it roars back to life, keeping me awake as I obsessively replay every interaction, searching for the moment where I went wrong. I've spoken to mutual friends, carefully, without wanting to put them in the middle. They've been kind but vague. She's going through a lot, they say. Or, it's complicated. No one has outright said I'd crossed the line, but no one has absolved me either. The uncertainty is its own kind of punishment. What haunts me most is that I'll never know her side of the story. What did she see in our interactions that made her decide I needed to be cut out of her life so completely? Was I just collateral damage in her journey to independence, a reminder of a difficult time she needed to leave behind? Or was I actually a source of pain, of unwanted pressure during her most vulnerable moments? I've considered reaching out, finding some way around the digital barriers she's erected to offer an apology, to seek closure. But what right do I have to demand her attention now, when she's made it clear she wants nothing to do with me? Wouldn't that just be another selfish act disguised as contrition? So instead, I sit with this discomfort. I examine my behavior through new lenses, trying to see the patterns I missed. I think about consent in friendship, how enthusiasm for connection doesn't equal permission for escalation. I wonder how many other women in my life have felt cornered by my attention, have laughed along with my flirtation, not because they welcomed it, but because they didn't know how to safely reject it. The hardest truth to face is this: even if she did encourage my flirtation at times, Even if there were genuine moments of connection between us, I was pursuing a woman in crisis. Someone whose marriage was crumbling, whose life was in flux, who was vulnerable in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. What kind of friend sees that situation and thinks, this is my opportunity? I'm trying to forgive myself. My therapist says that shame without growth is just self-indulgence, another form of selfishness. So I'm working to transform this experience into something useful, something that might prevent me from making the same mistakes again. I'm learning to value friendship for itself, not as a stepping stone to romance. I'm practicing sitting with rejection without making it mean something about my worth as a person. I'm getting better at asking direct questions instead of interpreting signals, at hearing just friends as an offering rather than a dismissal. Most importantly, I'm learning that someone else's crisis is never an invitation to insert myself as the solution. People in pain need support, not saviors looking to be validated through their rescue efforts. I don't know if my former friend would recognize these changes in me. I don't know if she'd care. Perhaps in her story, I'm just a footnote. An awkward chapter in a difficult year that she's already moved beyond. Perhaps she rarely thinks of me at all. But I think of her. Not with the same infatuation as before, but with gratitude, regret, and hope. Hope that she's finding her way forward, that she's surrounded by people who respect her boundaries, that she's building the life she deserves. And if by some chance she ever reads this, though I've changed enough details that she probably wouldn't recognize herself, I want her to know, I'm sorry. For whatever part of our friendship made you feel you needed to cut me out completely, I am truly sorry. You deserve better from me. I hope you found peace in your new beginning. I hope the library still feels like home. I hope you eventually found that book. The most painful irony in all of this is that I, a man who spent a month reading a book every day, failed to correctly read the most important text of all, the subtext of our relationship. I've always struggled with nuance in social situations. My autism means I often miss the subtle currents that neurotypical people navigate instinctively. But this experience has shown me that my difficulties run deeper than I realized. It's not just that I miss social cues, it's that I sometimes replace them with narratives that suit my desires, filling in the gaps with what I want to see rather than what's actually there. When she laughed at my flirtatious comments, was she encouraging me or just being polite? When she shared intimate details about her failing marriage, was she inviting me closer or simply needing someone, anyone, to witness her pain? When she sent selfies and heart emojis, was she signaling romantic interest or just engaging in the kind of casual affection that friends often share? I'll never know for certain. But I'm learning to live with that uncertainty, to accept that human connections are rarely as clear-cut as I want them to be. People are not puzzles to be solved or codes to be cracked. They're complex, contradictory beings whose actions often stem from motivations even they don't fully understand. This realization has been humbling, but also freeing in a strange way. It takes the pressure off, this acknowledgement that I can't always know what another person is thinking or feeling with absolute certainty. All I can do is ask, listen, and respect the answers I receive, even when those answers aren't what I hope to hear. I've joined a support group for adults with autism, something I'd resisted for years out of some misguided pride. It helps to hear others talk about similar misunderstandings, to know I'm not alone in sometimes getting things catastrophically wrong, despite the best intentions. We're all learning together, sharing strategies for navigating a world that often feels like it operates on rules we weren't given access to. One thing that's become clear from these sessions is how often people on the spectrum can become fixated on potential romantic connections, misinterpreting kindness as attraction because we so desperately want to be chosen, to be understood, to be valued for who we are. It doesn't excuse my behavior, but it helps me contextualize it, to see it as part of a larger pattern I can work to change, rather than a moral failing unique to me. I'm also learning to give more weight to explicit communication, rather than implicit cues. When my friend said, just as friends, that should have been enough. Clear, unambiguous. The fact that it wasn't, that I rejected her friendship because it didn't match my romantic fantasies, says more about me than it does about her. There's a quote I keep coming back to, something I read in one of the books during my month-long reading challenge. We see others not as they are, but as we are. I saw my friend through the lens of my wants, my needs, my insecurities. I created a version of her in my mind that aligned with my desires, and when the real person didn't match that creation, I felt betrayed, as if she had somehow changed, when in reality, she'd probably been consistent all along. I was the one who kept shifting the goalposts of our relationship. Some nights, I still draft messages to her in my head. Apologies, explanations, questions. Words that will never be sent, never be read. Is this closure or just another form of fantasy? I'm not sure. But it feels important somehow, this imagined dialogue, this reckoning with what was lost. In these mental conversations, I finally say the things I should have said when she told me she just wanted friendship. I value what we have too much to lose it entirely. I need some time to adjust my expectations, but I don't want you out of my life. Or, I understand. Your friendship has been one of the most meaningful connections in my life, and I'd be honored to continue it on any terms that feel right to you. Instead, I chose pride over patience, fantasy over reality. I couldn't bear to be just her friend because I'd convinced myself I deserved more, that our connection entitled me to a specific kind of relationship. The arrogance of that assumption haunts me now. I wonder sometimes what might have happened if I'd responded differently. If I'd respected her boundaries while still maintaining our friendship. Would we still be in each other's lives? Would I have had the privilege of supporting her through her divorce, her new beginning? Would I have eventually met someone else and realized that what I felt for my librarian friend wasn't the once-in-a-lifetime connection I'd built it up to be in my head, but something equally valuable in its own right? These counterfactuals are pointless, I know. What happened, happened. The choices were made. The consequences unfolded. There's no going back, only forward. Hopefully with more wisdom, more humility, more respect for the complexity of human relationships. The hardest lesson in all of this has been learning to sit with my shame without letting it define me. To acknowledge that I mishandled something precious without concluding that I am fundamentally unworthy of connection. To recognize that good people can cause hurt without intending to, and that the path forward involves taking responsibility rather than drowning in self-recrimination. So here I am, still learning to read between the lines of my own heart, still figuring out how to navigate relationships with authenticity and respect. Still missing my friend, the real one, not the fantasy version I created in my head, but the complex, brilliant woman who saw value in me as a friend, even when I couldn't see it myself. If there's any silver lining to this painful experience, it's the growth it has forced in me. I'm more mindful now of the stories I tell myself about others' intentions. More careful about respecting stated boundaries, rather than looking for loopholes or exceptions. More grateful for friendship as its own complete and precious form of connection, not as a consolation prize or a stepping stone to something better. And perhaps most importantly, I'm learning to forgive, both myself and others, for being imperfectly human, for making choices based on incomplete information, for sometimes getting it wrong, despite our best intentions. To anyone reading this who recognizes themselves in my story, either as the friend who misread signals or the one who had to enforce boundaries, know that you're not alone. We're all just doing our best to connect in meaningful ways, to be seen and valued for who we truly are. Sometimes we stumble. Sometimes we hurt each other. But as long as we're willing to learn from these missteps, to grow and try again, there's hope for all of us. Even for a socially awkward bookworm who lost one of the most important people in his life, because he couldn't tell the difference between a genuine connection and a story he was telling himself. Even for me,